Okay, if you have not been with us, we've been starting Daniel, an exemplary character in the Old Testament. Exemplary because he's a righteous young man who listens to God, obeys God, follows God. He's in a horrible foreign circumstance, he's still being obedient to God. And great things are happening, not because Daniel's necessarily a great guy, but God himself is waiting for someone just like Daniel to influence the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, who here is portrayed sleeping on the couch, because where we are in the whole book of Daniel is the result of Nebuchadnezzar sleeping. If he had never slept, he would not have had this dream, and he had this dream. So here we are at the beginning of Daniel. There's this dream that Nebuchadnezzar has, and this dream is making him crazy. So he has this dream, and he can't quite figure out what it's all about, but it's really scary. It is really scary. It's very obtuse. It's very symbolic, but it says in the passage that he's deeply frightened because of it. So, of course, he's the king of Babylon. What he does is he brings in his learned spiritual advisors, and they come in, and he tells them, what you need to do is tell me about this dream because it's just making me crazy. That's my words in Nebuchadnezzar's mouth, because he's so fearful, because it's just really troubling. By the way, too, this morning I was waking up, having a problem waking up, and I was having a dream that was making me very fearful and anxious. And you wake up finally thinking, oh, I'm awake. It was a dream. You know that feeling? Well, we'll multiply that by 1,000,000. That's what Nebuchadnezzar's going through. So he calls on all of his spiritual advisors. They line up around him, and they said, we're here, O king. What's your dream? He says, you tell me the dream, then you can tell me the interpretation. And so they have this back and forth at this point. And these advisors keep saying, no, that's not how it's done. Tell us the dream, we tell you the interpretation. Nebuchadnezzar gets mad, and he says, no, look, I will not accept your interpretation until first you can tell me the dream. I'm not telling it to you. After all, you're the wise guys, right? And 3 times these guys try and weasel out of this. And finally, their third attempt, we read this last week, their third attempt is, look, this isn't fair. This is not the way it's done. No one can do this. No man on earth can do this, because this is something that's reserved for the gods. Well, so that makes Nebuchadnezzar so mad that he puts out a contract on all his wise guys. And he tells his enforcers, you go out and kill every one of these guys, because they're phonies, they're fakes. He even says in the passage that Nebuchadnezzar says, you guys are just stalling for time in these discussions. So he's just had it. He's had up to here with them. He decides to kill them all. He sends out the killers. Well, it turns out Daniel was never in this original discussion with the king. And Daniel has this gift from God to interpret dreams. But Daniel wasn't there. But Daniel and his friends are going to be killed along with the fakers who couldn't come up with the dream. So the word comes to Daniel and his friends, the guy who's supposed to take out all the wise people. And Daniel says, what's the urgency all about? And so the guy who's going to take him out says, well, this is the deal. Here's the dream. And so Daniel very faithfully says, listen, make me an appointment with the king. I'll tell him his dream. Even though Daniel at the time doesn't know what it is. But he says, make the appointment. And if Daniel doesn't get some kind of telegram from God about this dream, then the next time he sees Nebuchadnezzar, since he's in a really foul mood, he's going to be killed on the spot. So by faith he goes, he sets up the appointment. That night he comes to his friends and says, we need to pray that God gives me the understanding of this dream, and I'll interpret, and I'll have the dream, and I'll go, because I'm going into the king. The appointment's already set. Here we go. And whoosh, and he gets it. God gives him the dream, the interpretation. And so then he comes to the king and says, let me tell you the dream. Now, last week I teased you. We didn't tell you what the dream was. We're going to put it off to today. But before he actually spilled the beans about the dream, Daniel does a remarkable thing in chapter 2. He says, look, I'm giving you this message not because I'm hot stuff, but because the God of heaven has revealed this to you. This is God's matter with you, O king, not anything to do with me. So he does a really nice setup before he tells him the dream, okay? That was a great thing we looked at last week, because what he could have done was strut around and said, well, all of your wise guys in the kingdom are fakers. They don't know what they're talking about, but I am the genuine article. He could have strutted around in pride and said, I've got the answer. And he could have used that from a prideful way, to promote himself and to glorify himself, but he doesn't do it. So last week we talked about the humility that Daniel has, that he didn't use a great opportunity for his pride. Instead, he gave God the glory. And he said, so, O King Nebuchadnezzar, here's your dream. And then we stopped the text last week, and here we are today. So we're going to look at the dream today. You ready? You don't seem very excited. I was pretty excited. So here we go. Here we go. Here's the dream. Now remember, this is the deal. If you're connected to God, then Nebuchadnezzar expects you to know the dream before you interpret the dream. It's like mind reading. How can anyone know a dream? Like I had this bad dream waking up this morning. Do you know what it was? You'd have to be a mind reader. Well, this is the position he's in with Nebuchadnezzar. So here's the big drum roll. He comes before Nebuchadnezzar and he presents the dream itself. Part 1, the dream. So this is Daniel chapter 2, verse 31. And he said, you saw, O king, and behold, a great image. And this image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you. And its appearance was frightening. Nebuchadnezzar's thinking, okay, that's my dream. Continue. So he continues. Well, the head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and clay. So what he saw was some kind of image of a person, of a man, okay? So, but it's very unusual. So he says the head of this image was of fine gold. This is actually a side picture of a real statue during this time, about 5 centuries before Jesus, of a royal person. So we're overlaying the colors and the metals on this real statue. So this is probably what royalty looked like at the time. So he says the head of this image was of fine gold. Okay, how about the rest of it? Well, its chest and the arms of silver. Okay, you move your way down. Its middle and its thighs of bronze. So there you go. And its legs, they were iron. And then lastly, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Well, what's scary about that? Oh, it's what comes next that's scary about that. I mean, this is just some kind of figure you'd see in a museum that's got different metals in different sections. I mean, there's nothing really scary about that. But it's what happens next. And as you looked, this is Daniel to Nebuchadnezzar, as you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on the feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Shoot, boom! Remember a couple of years ago, there was like 3 asteroid movies in the theaters at the same time, it seemed like? I mean, asteroid movies were a big deal. This is the asteroid movies to succeed all asteroid movies. There's a stone. There's this stone that's cut out not by human hands. What does that mean? Well, there's some kind of weird divine thing going on here. A stone cut out not by human hand, and then shh, and a boom, and it hits the feet of iron and clay, breaks it in pieces, bam, all over the place. Well, that's a little scary. Violence in dreams is always scary. And then it goes on, and he says, then the iron and the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold, all together were broken in pieces. So not just the feet. The entire thing is just obliterated, broken in pieces, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. So this image he's using, we don't know much about today. So I'll bring an image from Vietnam where I was a couple of years ago. This is a threshing floor right here. So in that particular case, whether it's wheat or barley or rice, in order to process after you pick this, after it's dried, there's a hard outer covering around the seeds that you collect. You know that? Well, you eat popcorn? You know that hard stuff that comes off the outside of the popcorn kernel? That's the chaff. So what you have to do before you can eat it, this stuff, is you got to knock that hard chaff off. It's like plastic almost. I mean, it's just nasty stuff, completely indigestible, but you got to knock it off. So what you do is you rub it somehow, or you have donkeys walk on top of it. Somehow you need to be able to rub it so that outside covering kind of falls off. So now you've got the good grain, and then you've got this very flaky, wispy sort of plastic saran wrappy, hard, crusty thing that you got to, and now you have to separate them. Well, what's the easiest way to separate them? The wind. So what you do, like this person doing right here, is you take it up in the air and you slowly dump it down or pup it in the air, either way. So it just is free floating in the air, and you hope you have a breeze, and then the breeze comes in and it catches that chaff and knocks it all off, and the heavy grains fall down. So what he's saying, very familiar image to them, what he's saying is these these pieces of this statue, this big rock that was not hewn by human hands, presumably that means God, comes down, smacks the feet, and not only obliterates the feet, but obliterates the entire statue. And what's left of this monumental statue? Nothing but chaff. They're gone, completely eradicated. Dust in the wind, dude. Bill and Ted? Music? Okay, never mind. All we are, dust in the wind. So that's what he's saying. This picture of this thing undergoes this vast violence by this gigantic stone, knocks out the feet, knocks out the entire thing, nothing left, just like chaff in the wind blown on your lawn. It's just gone. Wow. But this continues. This is crazy. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the earth. What? So I don't think any of the asteroid movies had that going several years ago. I don't think. I remember tidal waves, but I don't remember it occupying the whole earth. By the way, scientists believe that's how the moon was formed, was a gigantic thing about the size of the earth, minus about half the size of the earth, collided with the very early earth, smacked into it sideways, knocked off a big lob of molten earth, and that went into orbit, and that became the moon. True? I don't know. I don't know, but that's what they think. Okay, filled the whole earth. So this was the dream. Here's the dream. Now we'll tell the king the interpretation. Dun, dun, dun. So far, he's told the king exactly what he saw. Now, if you were Nebuchadnezzar and you had that dream, you wouldn't have a clue what that was, right? This statue with different metals, and then it undergoes this gigantic violence from this huge asteroid that's not hewn with human hands, and it destroys the feet, and it destroys the entire statue, and it's gone like chaff, like dust in the wind. It's all gone. It's destroyed. So he just went through this incredible destruction thing. This is why Nebuchadnezzar's scared, because the violence is really disturbing. So what is the interpretation? Well, let's ask Daniel, who has been given the interpretation from God. So here we go. Verse 37. So as Daniel is wont to do, you'll see him do this many times in the book. He doesn't just dive into the interpretation. He puts a little prelude on it, like he did last week. So he's going to do it again right here. So here's his prelude to it. So you, O king, the king of kings, he's talking about Nebuchadnezzar. You, O king, the king of kings, because after all, Babylon is the superpower of the time. So he's the king of kings on earth in terms of all kingdoms. To whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom and the power and the might and the glory. So what he's saying is, oh, King Nebuchadnezzar, God has set you up to be king of the earth right now. And this is the God of heaven who's done this. This is not you. The God of heaven has done this, has given you this place that you have right now. And not only that, but because of your power, into whose hand he is given wherever they dwell, the children of man, that's all mankind. All mankind is subject to you. Also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. A heck of a prelude. So before he tells him what the dream says, he's saying, do you realize, Nebuchadnezzar, that the God of heaven is the source of why you are where you are today? Why you are the king of all the kings on earth, why you actually rule over the children of man, why you are so powerful. Do you realize that comes from the God of heaven? So just let's get this straight before I tell you the rest of the story. So he tells him that, and it's straight up. Well, you are the head of gold. What? You are the head of gold. Nebuchadnezzar is. But not just Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar represents a world empire at the time. He represents Babylonia. So in terms of realms, the gold head represents the era of the Babylonian superpower, which went from about 600 to about 500 BC, roughly. It's the superpower. So that's him. So he says, you're the gold head. Congratulations. Well, okay, so what's the rest of it? Well, he goes on. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you. So you're going to be taken over. Your reign does not go forever, O king. And you're going to be taken over by an inferior kingdom. And that inferior kingdom is this silver middle. So this is like a progression of kingdoms. And what is that middle kingdom? Well, we know this from when we were studying Nehemiah and I was going to say Esther. Ezra, thank you. Yeah, Nehemiah and Ezra. Yeah, well, it's the Medo-Persian Empire. It's a Medo-Persian. So the Persian Empire basically comes in, takes over the Babylonian Empire, takes over their houses and where they live in the Mesopotamian Valley, and they're just the next takeover guys. Cyrus is the king, and so you know his name. So it is an inferior kingdom, and in several ways, and historians admit the fact that Babylon had something that Medo-Persians didn't have. They were actually a mix between the Medes and the Persians, and they kind of got together. There was mixing of blood. There was marriages. So it was an inferior kingdom to Babylon, but nonetheless, it took over Babylon. It took over Babylon. So that's the next one. That goes up to about 332 BC. And you know what happens in 330 BC? A very, very famous man you might have heard about in your history books comes up. His name is Alexander the Great. And a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And that kingdom is the Greek kingdom. Alexander the Great comes around, and he basically goes and takes over the world. He takes over everything that the Medo-Persians control, everything the Babylonians control, and then some. He was actually pushing so far east that he was coming into India, which those guys hadn't done. But he got turned around at the Indus River. But I mean, that's where he was going. So Alexander the Great establishes this next kingdom. You can call it the Greek kingdom. It's probably better called the Macedonian kingdom. That's Upper Greece, where Alexander the Great was. But it's still Greek. Still Greek. We got more to go. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. Very clearly, this is the Roman Empire. They use their expertise in steel to make swords and defensive weapons that very few could do, and they took over the world militarily. Again, they grabbed it from the Greeks, and it was theirs. It grew slowly, but then when it took over. The Roman Empire. Yeah, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. But we still have these troublesome feet. It doesn't include that. But he says, and like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all of these kingdoms. Okay, so now what? That's a successive kingdom. Okay, the feet. And as you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay, right? And partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the firmness of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with soft clay. So this is a picture of the fact that something about the Roman Empire ends up not staying solidly steel. Somehow it intermixes with clay, the people of the earth. In fact, this is where you get the phrase today, feet of clay, which is used in English. There's something vulnerable here. Although there's some steel in it, which makes it strong, there's clay in it, which makes it brittle. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. It's interesting, in the previous kingdoms that came and went, they all came and went because the next kingdom came up and conquered them. But here at the end of the Roman Empire, it sort of falls apart because of the intermixing, because of how it intermixes with the cultures around. And that's very clearly what Rome was like. Rome had conquered so much, and the way that they had actually ruled their regions is that they mixed. They put governors in regions so that the governors ran it. They had a more, what do you want to call it? A kind of ruling idea when they took over all these lands. But still, that was their downfall. But no big kingdom comes and takes them over, it looks like. Well, let's just keep this going on, because Daniel's telling us more that he got from God. And as you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron doesn't mix with clay. It's a bad admixture. And then it goes on. Let's let the feet dissolve. Oh, there's the feet dissolving. Okay, never mind. Okay. Then it goes on, 44. Now, this is a very important part of the entire dream interpretation, so memorize this as we read it. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all the kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Okay, wait a second. Stop the truck. Are you so this giant asteroid that was not hewn by human hands, this is God's doing? But this isn't just God throwing thunderbolts from heaven. He's throwing a hard ball from heaven. What is this hardball from heaven? And why is it destroying kingdoms? And did it destroy the Roman Empire? Well, just hold that thought for a second. This is crazy stuff. Let me just read again. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Now that, if you're a Bible curiosity kind of person like me, that raises about 1 billion questions right there. And we'll get back to those. Let's go on and finish the interpretation. So, just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. Right? That's what God has done. So, Mr. Nebuchadnezzar, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. This is a prediction of the future. What shall be after this? The dream is certain. The interpretation is sure. Whoa. So this would cause me more fear if I was Nebuchadnezzar. What he's saying is that God just told Daniel, and Daniel just told me, that these are successive kingdoms. The first one at the top is gold, and that kingdom is going away. My kingdom is going away. No king likes to be told his kingdom's going away. And by the way, to rub salt in it, your kingdom is going away to be conquered by an inferior kingdom. You were sleeping and something happened. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar's dead by the time the kingdom changes, but still, it's an inferior kingdom. No king wants to be told that his rule isn't forever, and he doesn't want to be told that lesser people are going to take you over. That's just like, oh, what a pride killer that is. But Daniel says, you can question everything I just told you, but it's certain, and the interpretation is sure. Now, Nebuchadnezzar knows this because Daniel read his mind. It feels like Daniel knew the dream, and no one had told the dream. Nebuchadnezzar hadn't told anybody, but Daniel's telling it back to him. So that is his credibility mark right there. So if he got the dream exactly right, Nebuchadnezzar, then you can know the interpretation's exactly right. And this should shatter something about your rule and your sovereignty. Well, let's see what happened as a result of this. We're not going to hit those questions just yet. So what happens? How does Nebuchadnezzar react to all of this? Does he get mad because Daniel has the guts to tell him that his kingdom isn't going to last very long and it's going to be destroyed by an inferior kingdom? I mean, does Nebuchadnezzar get mad at him? Does he kill him? What's the result? Well, King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel. That picture is him going to his knees and his face on the ground. The king of the superpower of the world goes to his face, pays homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him, to Daniel. We need to burn incense to this guy because he's got something going that none of us have, right? So the king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly, your God is a God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." Okay, good. So Nebuchadnezzar is not giving Daniel the credit. He's giving Daniel's God the credit. And why? Because twice now, Daniel in his preludes on these discussions gave glory to God before he went much further. He did it today. He did it last week. This is what he does. And Daniel says, this is all of God. And somehow, Nebuchadnezzar realizes this. Whether he wants to believe this or not, he has to. This guy knew his dream. He has to. His arm's been twisted. And then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts. And they all lived happily ever after. Well, no. But he's impressed. Nebuchadnezzar's impressed. And he's got resources. So he honors Daniel and gives him many great gifts. But wait until you see what he gives him. This blows your mind. And he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon. Now, by description, Daniel is a young man at this point. It also kind of sounds like another story, that comes out of Genesis. Joseph. Joseph is made the CEO of Egypt. And on a similar kind of context with the Pharaoh right there. Well, here's Daniel in the same position. So Nebuchadnezzar says, this guy's going to run Babylon now. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar will still be king. He's not going to be king, but in terms of the CEO, he'll be the CEO of Babylon. He'll be in charge of the whole province of Babylon. All of it. This young man who seems to have a divine connection. That seems like a good thing to do. Oh, and, by the way, he's also in charge. He'll be the chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon, or what I call, the guy in charge of the wise guys. These are the guys who were all going to die because they were fakers, because they couldn't come up with the interpretation, nor could they come up with the dream itself. These are the guys who are going to die, and Daniel saved their lives by doing this. And that's what he does. So Daniel made a request to the king. So since Daniel's in charge of the kingdom all of a sudden, he says, well, while I'm being appointed in charge of things right here, can I make a request? So he does. He makes a request of Nebuchadnezzar. And the request is, he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to do what? Over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So even though Daniel now is the CEO of Babylon, under the king, but still running everything, then Daniel says, I need people to help me. I want my friends that came out of Israel with me, I want them to help me. So put them in places where they'll be the administrators of the entire province of Babylon. So this is Daniel, who's been put in the president's position in a sense, saying, I want my own cabinet to run Babylon. I want my guys to be in that cabinet. And he allows that. He allows that. In a very short amount of time, these youth have been taken as slaves out of Israel, brought to Babylon to serve the Babylonian kingdom. The prophet Jeremiah wrote in a letter in Jeremiah 29, you need to be a blessing to this nation. You need to look to their benefits in every way. You need to help the kingdom of Babylon. Don't just waste time here. And so Daniel and his friends do that very thing. And now they're not only serving Babylon, but Babylon is serving them. It's an extraordinary change. Why? Because they're such sharp kids? No, because of the God of heaven. Because of the God of heaven. Wow. But Daniel remained at the king's court. So that's a way of him kind of closing out here saying, although his friends were in charge of the daily administration of Babylon and all the disputes and things that had to be settled and all that kind of stuff, Daniel stayed in the king's court. That is, every time the king had a public appearance, he'd go up on his throne. He'd be surrounded by people who are in his own cabinet. Daniel would be one of those guys. Every time the king was seen, so was Daniel. He was in the upper echelon of everyone in all of Babylon. Because after all, he's running the nation. And his friends are being the administrators of it. Crazy. Well, that's as far as we're going to go today. But I do want to tell you what we're going to do next. And I'll highlight that by what we're going to talk about here. I want to talk about sovereignty and what sovereignty is. Because we just looked at a succession of kingdoms who thought they were forever sovereign over what they're doing. Sovereignty is an issue. Like last time we looked at humility. The time before that we looked at faith. There's issues that kind of pop up out of this. So here's what I want to talk about. You probably have never used the word sovereignty, at least not this week. Anyone use the word sovereignty? No. Ever? You did? Oh, okay. Well, for the rest of us who are behind you, here's the definition of sovereignty. Sovereignty can generally be defined as a supreme authority. Sovereignty entails hierarchy within a state, as well as external autonomy from other states. In any state, sovereignty is assigned to the person, the body, or the institution that has the ultimate authority over other people and to change existing laws. So, or my simplistic definition is sovereignty is all about who has the final word in a state. So this is the ultimate authority. Or President Truman had a sign on his desk that says the buck stops here. So who has the ultimate authority? Where does it go? That's sovereignty. So when we talked about the succession of kingdoms, they all thought they had sovereignty, but then they were taken over by someone else who clearly had more sovereignty, more power, ability to take them down. So I want to talk about sovereignty because it's going to set us up for next week as we talk further about this. Let me talk about this, what we call sovereign humans. When we talk about human terms of sovereignty, it's somewhat flawed. And I'll just point out a couple of things you can think about this. People who have power is what I'm talking about. People who think they have ultimate power, right? Well, it turns out sovereignty with humans, supreme control is always an illusion with humans. You think you got it until an inferior kingdom takes you down. You don't really have it. You don't really have it. Now now you're saying, what has this got to do with me? I am not a king. Well, actually you are. Not only do we live like kings, but we tend to run our lives as though we are the kings of our lives, that we are in supreme control of everything that happens to us and will happen to us, that we are on top of things and nothing will get the better of us. And by the way, that by definition means I'm sovereign over my own life. That's an illusion. And it doesn't take anything to break that. I mean, it breaks very quickly. But for some reason, we drift into this position thinking that I'm in supreme control of my own life. Now, things may happen, and I can deal with those, but I think I'm better than those things. Even if the things I can't predict are going to happen, I think I'm still better than it. I'm up for this. I got this. I'm on top of this. That kind of control is illusory. It's just not there. And God, in his loving discipline of us, reminds us that we are not in supreme control of our lives. Things happen that you just cannot control. You cannot prevent. They happen. And so whether you're willing to admit it or not, the reality is that kind of personal sovereignty is an illusion. Now, to be fair, we do a lot of things to deal with situations. We need to be responsible when things come up. We need to protect our families when dangers arise. We need to do a lot of things that are responsible. So I'm not saying that being responsible is wrong. I'm not saying that grappling with issues is wrong. Those things are all correct. The issue is do you in a prideful way consider yourself supremely in control of all those things that can and could ever happen? And if the answer is no, then we have good cause to go to the one who is supremely in control, God himself. Now, when things go so bad that you realize, I wasn't in control of this, this got the better of me, that's the time when we finally go to the supreme person in control of the universe, isn't it? That's when we go to him and say, boy, God, I thought I had this. But then the car died. And then I got pneumonia. And then I couldn't pay my rent. And then, all these things cascade. And it's at that point that we realize, well, I guess all I can do is pray because I can't control the situation anymore. Well, that was always the situation. You were always dependent on God, always. And a better lifestyle, instead of thinking from day to day that I'm in supreme control of my own life, still be responsible, still be disciplined, still do the things you don't want to do. I mean, those things are important, but you're not ultimately in control of everything. So when things fall apart, they fall apart because you can't place yourself in the position of the God of the universe in your life. Only God can be that. He's the one in supreme control. So anytime you feel like I've got this and you stir it around and think, you need to lose that. And by the way, God does not let you strut too long before he forces you to lose that. God's the only one in supreme. So supreme control is what humans do, and that kind of sovereignty is not God's kind of sovereignty, but it is something we slip into all the time. Now, if you were made king like Nebuchadnezzar, you would have double reason to think, I'm in charge of everything. I'm in control of everything. I've got troops, I've got gold, I've got slaves, I've got everything and all the resources of all known civilization. Why would I not be able to strut around and say that I'm in control of everything? I'm the supreme commander of the world, right? That would be an easy temptation. And the richer you get, that's a very simple temptation that you fall to. I've got resources, I can handle anything. Next on human sovereignty, your kingdom will always be left to another. Can't take it with you. And this happens in the succession of kingdoms that we saw earlier. They build these kingdoms, they amass fortunes, they amass real estate. I mean, they do all these kinds of things. In the end, it's always left to another person. It's never permanent. It's never permanent. So that's the fault. However, I know you're saying that's sort of the Captain Obvious comment on it. The problem is that when we're satisfied that we're in control of things right now, we think it's going to last forever. It's the time issue. You just think, because I can't see any threats on the horizon, That my control is going to be maintained. This could go on for decades, maybe even to the end of my life. I'm in control. We have a weird tendency to think that our influence and stuff like that will persist forever. And I don't know why we think that. But the real nasty irony of the entire thing is that what you do to preserve that control right now, what you do to preserve the resources, everything you do to serve yourself in that sense, eventually goes to somebody else. Remember that guy who got those great harvests? Said, I got to buy myself bigger barns. I'll stick my bigger barns in, my bigger barns. He's thinking, I can stop working. I can stop planting. This is the best thing ever. This will persist forever. And then Jesus says in the parable, and that night he lost his life. See? So we do have this tendency, again, to think that we're in a God sort of way, that once we're in control, that control not only will not be shaken, but will persist forever. And it never is. It never is. What you need to do instead is, when you're thinking like a sovereign king in your own life circumstances, you need to say, well, God, I thank you for where you've brought me today. I thank you for what's happening right now. I thank you that you are in charge. You're in control of my circumstance. It's not about me. And this may change tomorrow. And God, I'll still be thankful for what you brought today. That's a whole different mindset from when those things come and steal away your control and steal away what you're protecting. And you say, well, that's not fair. No, actually, that's what life is all about. You're not God. You're not God. And building bigger barns isn't going to extend that time. But you do need to thank God for those times when you have that stuff going. And that makes it easier then when the circumstances change. God gives and he takes away. Things change. Let's talk about God's sovereignty for a second. That's much, much different, in great contrast. And this is what he's getting at in his passage right now. He talks about the succession of the greatest superpowers on earth. And they are history makers, these superpowers. But in the end, they're all blown away by God's kingdom. So God's kingdom is different. His supreme authority always exists. It always exists. It's existed before he made the universe. And then when he snapped his fingers and spoke some words and he created the universe, his sovereignty continued there because he's creator of everything. Paul tells us that Jesus holds everything together. He holds the creation itself together. If he let go, we'd all evaporate like dust in the wind. I was going to sing it, but I won't do that. He's sovereign. I mean, when I say sovereign, he's like really sovereign. He's got the final word. He had the first word. He has the final word. He's got this. Which raises some interesting problems if you think about how bad the world can be or how bad the world has been. Are you telling me when you say that God was sovereign? He was in final word control of the entire world and he let this happen? And that's a profound and a very honest question that people ask all the time. The problem of evil and its effects. How can a loving God whose sovereignty extends over all of his creation, how can he allow that to happen? Is he sovereign or isn't he sovereign? Is he loving or isn't he loving? And that's a topic we'll have to take up for another time, because that's a profound question that has been ever since the beginning of the founding of Israel and then through the time of Jesus and beyond and to this very day. When you listen to people debate about Christianity, you have atheists and Christians, this topic will come up every single time. And it's a quandary. It would take us several weeks to really scratch our chins and think through this. But there is no doubt biblically what this statement says. This statement, God's kingdom is forever. It has always existed and it will never stop existing. Even in the face of people like Nebuchadnezzar. Even in the face of your most hated president of the United States. Even in the face of Hitler. Even in the face of everything. God's kingdom still exists. Now, I say that somewhat flippantly because I know you chose your favorite president to hate when I said that. But I say that flippantly because there's a sense in which when we are under the thumb of bad government or bad influences or bad culture, we tend to forget the fact that, God's still in control. And that's the chief deterrent for you circling down the drain when you think about the problems that come from that kind of government control. Now, when I was in Vietnam a couple years ago, I talked to some pastors there that we were training in house pastors who had actually been imprisoned for being Christians after the overturn of Vietnam in 1975, when the U.S. pulled out in 1975 and the communist Chinese influence north came down. And and it was brutal. I talked to a couple of pastors who are now older men who were sent to work camps, hard work camps, and they told me what they experienced. Now, we don't experience that kind of thing here. We could someday. But in the midst of all that stuff, as they're talking to me, they kept expressing as they're talking, but you know, God's still in control. God's kingdom still exists. He hasn't lost his sovereignty. He hasn't gone to sleep in Vietnam after 1975. God's still here. And through that process, they would talk about the fact that persecution and the problems and the harm that came from that actually forged a whole new generation of spiritual leaders in Vietnam, which today has brought Vietnam to the place that Franklin Graham has had 2 large outdoor crusades in Vietnam in the last 2 years, and thousands of people have come to Jesus because of the leadership that was forged through those work camps. Work camps, good or bad? Well, bad in the short term, maybe good in a genius way from God in the long term, right? God's still sovereign. Despite the political waves that you are subjected to today, he's still sovereign. There's still a kingdom above this kingdom. So just don't forget that. By the way, and that's a great news because God is omnipotent. He's all powerful, and he also loves you so much that he sent his son to die on your behalf. And so Paul makes the argument, if God sent his son to die on your behalf, then what's God going to withhold from you now? Does that make any sense? You go, well, I'm done. Bye. No. Oh, how he loves you and me. He gave his life. What more can he give? He loves you and me. One second point on the sovereign God is this. He appoints evil princes, I call them, by allowing them to be. Now, God could, in every change of the political realm and every king that comes and goes, God could look at the king and go, well, not you, and squash him. But God allows certain kings to come in. This is the way that things change in the culture. He allows them to happen. God doesn't equip them with evil. They come to the game equipped with evil. And God just decides not to squash them. Now, but there's another positive influence that goes on when the King of Kings sees these kings come into being as the superpowers. He does influence them. He does influence them. And as we went to Ezra and Nehemiah, when the captivity has gone on for several decades in Babylon, when they took the Israelis to Babylon, God somehow, when the kingdom changes from Babylonia to the Medo-Persians, Cyrus is the guy who's in charge then. And it says right there, we read it ourselves a couple months ago, that God steered the heart of Cyrus and said, you need to let these Israelis go back home and rebuild their temple that got knocked down by Nebuchadnezzar. Well, how did that happen? Well, God can steer the heart of the kings. And I think it's in Proverbs that basically it says that the heart of kings is like a stream and God can divert it any direction he wants. How's that happen? I don't know. But we see the evidence of it in Ezra and Nehemiah twice. One time with one supreme ruler of the Medo-Persian Empire tells them to go back and rebuild their temple. Second time in Nehemiah's time, the next ruler says you need to go back and rebuild the walls that protects Jerusalem. Why? Well, God. So God can steer the stream of the life of a king, and he also allows certain kings to exist because he's the final word on all of these things. He's sovereign. No one else really is. And one last note on this. One day he will no longer allow these princes to exist. Now I call them princes instead of kings because they're just localized powers, localized temporary power, and not highest powers. Because the kings that call themselves the King of Kings, they're not really. There's one King of Kings. One day God will no longer allow them to exist, and that day is at the end of the world. That's the apocalypse. And God will bring them to judgment. And he will no longer allow these people to do what they do. That judgment is coming. Okay, we need to wrap this up. So next time, we're going to try and answer some of those questions that I raised just slightly about his mentions of the rock that was not hewn by hands and this kingdom that came. I mean, this disturbing part of the dream, which we didn't spend hardly any time on, was this mountain that comes and basically becomes the earth. I mean, what? This asteroid from heaven, what I call the hardball from heaven. I mean, what is this all about? So we're going to ask some questions next time. We're going to explore this some more because it turns out that academics, they really don't debate the sequence of kingdoms in this picture. The gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron. They don't dispute that. In fact, many critics of the Bible will say that's proof of the fact that Daniel was written far later than we think it was, because how could Daniel be that accurate? They use that against Daniel because it fits so perfectly the succession of kingdoms that happened after Babylon. I mean, so perfectly. I mean, really, even up to the iron and clay mixed feet. I mean, it's just a perfect thing. There's no extra kingdoms that got left out in that. So critics will say, yeah, clearly it's a hindsight prophecy, not a foresight prophecy. Clearly you can't be that accurate. It couldn't have been 5 centuries before Jesus. No, I don't think so. Well, it was. It was. But this thing right here, he introduces this idea of the kingdom of God smashing the biggest kingdoms on the world. So it raises questions that we need to answer, and they're complex enough we need to do that next week. So we're not going to read further in the passage. We're just going to stroke our chins a little bit, and we're going to think about what we just saw here about this kingdom that comes that's so unlike the others. Because here's the deal. He gives us this picture of the sequence of real narrative kingdoms after kingdoms after kingdoms after kingdom. And we see these in the history books. And then this kingdom comes and smashes them all apart. So some of the questions that I have about all of this, if this is God's kingdom he's talking about, does that mean that God's kingdom has already come? Other questions. Did this actually happen while these kings were there? Remember he says that? During the time of these kings, this will happen? What does that mean? And did the God's kingdom end the Roman Empire? And if you've got a big question mark in your head, so do I. So we need to answer this because the succession of human kingdoms, that's child's play in this picture. But this picture of God's kingdom at the end of that, the thing that so troubled Nebuchadnezzar, that so threatened and frightened Nebuchadnezzar, the coming of this gigantic asteroid from heaven that conquers all the best known kingdoms of the world. That kingdom needs to be explored. So next time we're going to look at that, and we're going to scratch our heads about that, and we're going to pull in some other scriptures to talk about the kingdom of God, because that is the central part of this dream. It's not the succession of the other kingdoms. It's this. It's this. And we're going to ask some concrete questions about that. What is the kingdom of God? And in what way did it smash into bits, into chaff, all the other biggest kingdoms of the sequence of the entire world? How? What? So we're going to look at that next week. Okay? And he'll still be sleeping next week. No? Well, let's pray. So, Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your word to us. We thank you that not only does it answer questions, but it raises profound questions. And as a result, we come to your throne eager to understand, like Daniel did, what this all means and what you're trying to tell us and why this is even important. So, Father, we pray that you would give us further understanding as we continue to walk around and carry these scenes in our hip pocket and chew on them a bit and go, yeah, what about that? And pray, God, that through all of this, that you'd give us a refined understanding of your sovereignty as the king, the creator king over all things, and your relationship with the powerful, quote-unquote, men of the earth. And that in the end, we are encouraged by the fact that you're allowing these injustices for these kingdoms for a while to exist, but a time is coming where they will stop. And then in the prophetic literature, it says that tears will be dried up and everything will be different. But God, you're still in control and have never lost control, and you're not sleeping. So thank you for this passage. Give us wisdom and insight that only your Spirit can, and guide us into your truth as you reveal these great mysteries that you revealed to Nebuchadnezzar, and now here, 2,500 years later, you reveal to us. So we thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen.